Mr. Gant.
Mr. Richardson, would you help me a little bit? You talked about unfunded mandates a little while ago. We've been directed this year to increase salaries for a step increase. Is that correct? And the amount of money that will be reimbursed is less than what it costs to do that.
I would like to say that that's been a mandate. It's in law. That it has been suspended a couple of times.
Right.
I don't think this district ever suspended that. That has always been an unfunded mandate. That is something that's always been paid for from the local level. The state has never provided funding for that.
That's where I was going to go with the next part of that. This is not the first time there's been a requirement of the law and the legislature, the laws made by the legislature to do a certain thing that we don't have the money provided to do that with. Is that correct? That's a correct
that would
statement?
be correct.
That would be something that's happened and compounded over the years also, because we have to, once we make that pay increase, we have to continue to fund that the next year and the next. So there's another compounding effect. I don't think we've had any runaway spending. Have our costs gone up for electricity over the last 5, 7, 10 years? Or
I know they've gone up over the past year, yes.
So we've experienced things just like everybody else, we being the school district. Our costs go up. We have mandates that come about. I'm perplexed by the whole thing. We used to be an autonomous school district. We could be concerned. We were fiscally conservative. I do think we were. If we had an event that came about, we could make it up. We don't have that anymore. And Act 380 has hamstrung us. I think Dr. Hefner made the wonderful case for this district being extraordinary, not an ordinary district. I hope and pray we don't get to that level, because I think that's the expectation of our community. I was looking at your projections, no matter how we look at this, with what it was going to cost for an automobile of $20,000, what it would cost a business cumulatively. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that Act 388 was put into place by the big drumbeat of give the homeowner a break on their property tax for school operations. Is that not correct?
That would be correct.
And that's still in place now. Second homes, lake homes, things that don't qualify are not going to get that, and I guess they'd fall in that same category with a business almost. It's a real quagmire to be in, and I don't know the answer to it, but I don't think the answer is to roll back somewhere and just say we're going to let it consume us, because I really don't see, unless there was an extraordinary growth in our economy in the state, that our legislature is going to, you know, I've watched them this year. They've had item after item, roads are an issue, problems here and there. I don't know that the schools, although it's always a top priority, it seems to be, until it's time to fund it, I don't know that we'll ever get back to where the promised base student cost. If we were getting the correct base student cost at this point, would we be close to funding this budget?
Well, I can't recall exactly what the base student cost should be, but it would be in the $2,800 range.
Right.
So obviously it would help tremendously.
Right. Well, and I was really asking those questions because I think we've had spending that's been required to keep up. Cost increases, we've had unfunded mandates, and that's happened all over the state. I'm sure it's happened everywhere. And we're still an extraordinary school district, and I think we're really at a crossroads at this point. We're at Crossroads School, we're at a crossroads, but I don't know the answer, but I sure don't want to just say we're going to turn tail and run. But I don't know. There's a lot of things that have come into this, and I don't see it changing. We did had our second day at the Capitol last Wednesday, talked to legislators. Most of them agree that Act 388 was not good legislation. They also all agree that they'll probably not live to ever see it change because of the homeowner exemption in there. All the homeowners wanted an exemption, and there's been a lot of subsidizing of, there's a lot of issues with that too. I'll leave it at that right now, but I do know our costs have increased. I know it's going to take an extraordinary effort and courage on this board to get to the next step of this, and we don't even know what next year will bring. So I'll leave it for now, and I might want to come back and talk about that.
Certainly, thank you. Mr. White.
I've got some general statements I want to make about our budget, but I think I'm going to wait till after we make a motion. Are we going to make a motion and vote on the first reading tonight? Have a discussion of the budget at that time? I have a more board-oriented, points I want to bring up, but for Lynn, I guess, what do you think? I know when Dan Chandler was here, we were having some tough times when I first got on the board, and he showed us a graph that showed where state funding was, and it showed where the gap was in our cost, and then it also showed the line. State funding was doing a gentle decline, and our millage was doing a trajectory the opposite direction to make up for that difference. That's how we were filling that gap. But at that time, he said there was, on average, about a 5 to 7% annual inflation in our budget and cost. I know we went through this horrendous recession, but do you have any estimation of what it might be in recent years, what our annual, step increases are obviously part of that. That goes up every year. Electricity, insurance, gasoline for buses, et cetera. Any particular percentage?
If you look at, this year and I guess last year, I can't recall exactly, but we were in the 3 to 3.5% range of increased cost. This year we're proposing, as it stands right now, about a 2.7% increase in our cost, which I don't think are out of line with anything. Even maintaining that low level of growth, we could continue to have a gap.
Let me just explain something I did while we were talking. We had a speaker come up and say, you haven't changed your student count in 7 years, but your budget's gone up $31 million, something like that. So I was over here scribbling on my calculator, and somewhere between 3% and 4%, if you subtract $31 million off our proposed budget and you compound it by 3.5%, it's going to come back almost exactly to where we are today. You could do nothing, and our costs have increased about $31 million in 7 years. And all you got to do is just take a factor of 1.03 and multiply it 7 times. And it's basically, at 3%, it's a 122% increase in our budget. At 3.5 or at 4%, it's 1.26, a 26% increase in our budget. And somewhere in between that 3 and 4, the 4% would have our budget go up to $175,000. The 3% has our budget go up to $162,000. So,
Million?
Yeah, million. I'm sorry. I've done abbreviated math. But the point is, it's nothing but, and this is for the benefit of the board and the public, that differential, you don't need to add any students. Your annual inflation just goes up in 7 years. It's $31 million. So it would have gone up more had we added students. And we would have gotten more revenue from the state. But that's why our budget moves. It's not static with students. It's like everything in the world. Costs go up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I didn't do the math, Ed, but I agree. It doesn't matter whether you get another student or not. There are so many other variables that's going to raise the cost anyway that you can't even name sometimes. But it doesn't matter about the student ratio can remain the same. And I agree. I didn't do the math, but that's true.
Ms. Hannah.
But on that same point, we would, if we increase with students, we are paid that student. It would help us some, wouldn't it?
We'd have more revenue. Our
That's what I'm
budget would be
saying.
even larger. But
Right.
if it
You're just talking about the increased things like electricity, gas.
step increase, 7 years of step increases is almost $15 million.
And we've given that by mandate. But a lot of teachers, Ms. Watson, and any employee, not just teachers, whether they're bus drivers, staff, administrative staff, with the increased cost even at state level of insurance premiums, even as employees at any level get an increase over the year, even the step, they don't see anything increased in their salary necessarily. So I think that it's important that we look at that too. Here we are hunting this amount of money, but I think as a board, it's important too to know that looking for these ways that you've mentioned to try to cut where we can cut. I know that that's really what I want to know, that we've looked at all of those with the knowledge that we're going up for reasons. You know, I'm not arguing that, but I'm saying we've got to be good stewards of what we do have so that the employees do even feel a simple raise of the step increase. Because I can tell you, many of them say to me, I haven't seen a raise in real money. It's a raise and then it's taken in the higher cost of everything.
Yes, Ms. Baumgartner.
Just several comments. First of all, when I went through like in the expenditures, I did notice, and I just want to tell the staff how much I see it and appreciate it, in several categories that there is, the proposed budget's less. So y'all have been looking at ways to reduce in different areas, and it became real obvious to me, and I appreciate it. I won't go into each one, but I thought I did notice it. I think we've been beating up on you a little bit, so I wanted to give you a pat on the back.
Well, let me mention, though, that a lot of the reason you see that is because we may have budgeted for teachers to be in a certain classification or a certain grade level where they may not be there now, and that's one reason why you may see some of these differences.
Okay, but and also I noticed when we talk about Act 388, the whole idea that our legislature had is they want to fund just a minimally adequate education. That's not what we want here in District 5. And so we're having to work around it, and it is always been an obstacle because it's not designed for excellence. It never was.
I wanted to ask a question. Clearly, your presentation made a big impact on all of us, and we've all been paying attention. Now that we know we have this deficit, what is administration recommending to the board as far as getting where we need to be so we can approve a budget? Because we are supposed to do that at our June 5th meeting? June 8th meeting. So we need some feedback and some recommendations.
You want to take that one, or you want me to take that one?
I think we'll team do it.
Okay.
I'll respond first. I think clearly we're looking at some measures that are hugely significant. And I really think it's been important that we've worked through this process to get a feel for where our board is and again, to continue to whittle away at these figures. We're continuing to work on it. We're continuing to get new information as we've worked through this process. So I hate to create angst where angst is not necessary. So that's why I haven't submitted a more specific proposal today. But once we get direction from you, we will come in with a budget that meets whatever the bottom line is that you think is appropriate for our school system. Obviously, I would tell you, anything that we do is going to close that gap. So it depends on the size of the gap. But anything we do to close the gap is going to involve people, because 89% of our budget is people. And but we are continuing to work at it. We're even today we were working on it, and hopefully we found some things that were listed twice. Again, as you know, we've had these 5 separate systems in our district rather than one, and we found a few more things that were listed, that hadn't been paid twice, but they were listed twice. So we're continuing to work on that, looking for efficiencies we can get with where we have normal attrition. And again, we will come in with a recommendation that fills in that gap, however big it may be.
So what you're asking from the board members is for us to communicate to you how we want to fill in that gap. Is that what you're saying?
No, not necessarily. I think mainly want to know just how big that gap is. Is the gap is the gap going to be 4.9 million, or is it something less than that?
Okay, so I think that's a good question for each board member who wants to speak about this, realizing that in a few weeks we're going to have to make some hard decisions. And so I'd rather us get this information, our ideas, our questions out on the table now, so that June 8th, we are a little bit better prepared, and the administration can bring us a recommendation. Mr. White.
I'm going to go ahead and just lay out a couple of points that might be, at least my perspectives, that as we approach this decision, and rather than wait for the vote. But, and I just wanted to summarize for everybody on this board, and maybe I've been on this board long enough. I'm not worried about politically what, I mean, I'm more concerned about we do what's going to be best long-term, and that's one of the reasons I gave the example, and I won't share what we talked about in executive session, but I gave the example of something that happened 20 years ago, compounded and created a lot of problems over time, and actually cost money. I think what Steve, I left when you were giving the conversation about compounding, but what I already recognized from last year, just those two pieces of our budget, what we're allowed to raise in millage and what a step increase is. Our millage increase is less than the step increase, and our inflation is there too. That we're in a circumstance today where we have this compounding in the wrong direction. It's going in a negative direction. And I think one of the things that was interesting for me when Act 388 was passed, there was a lot of controversy, there was a lot of issues, but it was fascinating to watch Carl Fulmer when he got here subsequent to that. I mean, it was some years subsequent to that. And he basically warned us about, I mean, here's the reality. But before Act 388, state revenues were on a general decline. I mean, it was graphed for us by Dan Chandler. And our local millage we were raising was on a general upward incline, and it was filling the gap that wasn't being funded by the state. Homeowners were very vocal against that. What happened around us, though, and we had a very politically charged environment where there was a lot of pressure on minimizing or not raising when we could the millage, and one of the things I always personally did was fight to keep our class size in place, because what I've heard over and over from our support staff is class size is the most important factor. I mean, you want to hire good teachers, but if you put 50 or 40 kids in a classroom, they can't do their jobs. And so when Carl Fulmer got here, it was fascinating because around us, other districts had not gone through the political turmoil we had, and they had raised their millage every year. They were building schools. We weren't able to get a referendum passed for 8 years. And so the growth in schools isn't what caused this. It's the fact that we have a mechanical, this is like a math equation. A plus B equals C. Our step increase exceeds our millage increase, and we got on average right now about 3.5% inflation. That is a mathematical formula that is compounding in a negative direction. That being said, the money we need, one of the reasons from Act 388 that our fund balance got built up, we weren't alone in doing that. The whole state was doing that to different degrees. The CFOs were swapping notes and comparing strategies. How do you survive this funding formula? Because everybody knew it was going to hit a point where it couldn't fund districts. And that money is there for emergencies. It helped us get through the worst economic downturn we'll probably see in our entire lives. We would have fared horribly through that. Meaning we would have laid off massive amounts of people had we not done that. But the reality was people around us are situated differently than us, because when Act 388 came into effect, wherever you had raised your millage to that point, that's where you were frozen. So if the district next to us, or the one downtown, when I say next to us across the dam, Lexington 1 or District 2 downtown, if they were raising millage in years we weren't, they had a larger base the year Act 388 came in place. And when Carl got here, he said, what y'all have to really recognize is that when we come out of this bad economy, the day is going to come where districts start competing for teachers. And we're not going to be able to keep up. I mean, we can't even find money for a raise, but when you start talking about other districts giving people's raises and we can't fund raises, we're going to lose our competitive advantage there. But the reason that is the case is not because of, we're mismanaging our money. It's because other districts built up a larger tax base when Act 380 got funded. And what Carl explained to us was that Lexington won across the dam. If you adjusted it for the difference in population size, student size, they had approximately $8 million more recurring revenue every year in their budget. And when we come out of this bad economy, they're going to be in a position to hire our people away. And so that's the long-term effect of saying, do we pass on these layers of revenue? Because every millage increase is a layer of revenue. One of the things that I heard Robert mention from last time was somebody came up to him and said, well, just reduce your administrative costs. And that sounds very good because it doesn't hurt schools, it doesn't hurt classes, there's excess administrative expense, just get rid of that and balance your budget. The problem with that, we've been doing that for 12 years, the 13 or 12 years I've been on this board. The very first year that I was elected, there was so much noise about taxes and there was so much noise about reducing administrative costs rather than raising taxes that I asked the superintendent, who I've only known a couple of months, which was Dennis McMahon, to do a study of our administrative costs compared to similarly situated districts in this state. And he did it. And it took about 8 weeks, and he had to use about 12 or 15 staff members, work extra hours, and they compiled a study. And that study showed that we were below our peers. We were below average in terms of administrative expenses. And then shortly after that, I didn't even know this was going on, but a consultant who lived in this community, who I served on a school improvement council with, he got the school improvement council to do their own study using data. And albeit it was a couple of years old off the state's website, they did their own study of our administrative costs, and they concluded, again, we were below average compared to our peers, but they also went another step. This guy was a business person, and he went another step and tried to measure how we perform. We didn't generate revenue the way a corporation does. We generate results in how well we educate all the kids that are sent to us. And he compared, using test scores, what we had done, and what he basically showed was we were well above our peers in our scores and what we were producing. But from that, you fast forward about 2 years, and then the major financial firms started rating school districts for bond rating purposes on where they were with administrative costs. And I forget the name of the firm, but this was several years later. They came back with the same conclusion. When you looked at us across the state of South Carolina, we were below average in our administrative expenses. I don't know where we are today. I know every board member has a right to ask questions. We ought to be pushed on administrative expenses. But the other thing that Carl Fulmer shared with us during his time here was that there was a guideline or percentage of where you want your administrative costs as a percentage of your budget, or you don't have enough people supporting the teachers and the people that are on the front line with the kids. And we were on the low side of the recommended ranges. In other words, our administrative costs were getting very thin compared to what our operating costs were. In the last year's budget, when we sat down to deal with this issue of, okay, we have a step increase that exceeds a millage increase. Then we have the normal inflation coming in every year. And Jim Turner was on the board, and he was opposing the millage increase, and he went through a lot of arguments, and we ferreted this all out, and it's all in the website. I mean, it's all on the district's webpage. You can go back and review that. It was a very illuminating discussion, and Steve, you conveyed something to us at that time that I think was fundamentally important, was that if we did not continue to raise millages, which is every time we raise millage, it's a layer of recurring revenue. If we did not do that going forward, and this isn't a formula we came up with, this was a formula the General Assembly gave us, and those millage increases, I'm not a proponent of taxes by any means, but that millage increase was our authority to raise revenue. And they limited that, but that was our authorization to raise revenue. And we went through this discussion with Jim Turner.
I think some other people want to ask a question. Just try to wrap it up and we'll come back to you.
Okay, well, I can do this during the budget, but I want to walk through this before we get to a vote. I mean, you want me to wait to come back to discussion?
I'd rather listen to him. 'Cause I
Okay.
got about
So fundamental to the decision we're going to make. I mean, I think Robert said it best. The decision we make here on this budget is going to, I mean, we are at a crossroads. We're either going to decide we're going to let go of what we're doing and not worry about it and let it just be what it's supposed to, whatever it ends up being, or we need to put together all the pieces of what we know, and I'm trying to share what I know because I think everything I'm saying is very fundamentally important. When we were in that session last year, you made the point that if we did not make, and I know that it's a math, this isn't an opinion, this isn't a desire, this is not a political statement, it is a mathematical reality. If we're not getting every single level of recurring revenue we can, we may never be able to give our staff raises unless we let go of people to give other people raises. And the more we shrink this workforce, the higher the class size is going to get and the less quality. I mean, we may never be able to give them raises if we don't find other sources of revenue. And then you compound it with the problem. Not only we have inflation, not only we have a formula that's running in the wrong direction, but then in the last 2 years, money is very subtly being removed from our budget. And you went through that in greater detail in our last budget. But nobody in the public sees that. We don't see it unless somebody that does this full time that we hire stands in front of us and tells us where that money's going. It's going to those other school districts. I agree those school districts are entitled to more money, but are you going to lower the quality? I mean, we ought to be, and this is the crossroads where we are, we ought to be the example or one of the examples of what everybody in this state aspires to. And we ought to be what the General Assembly ought to be trying to help those other districts become, rather than removing money from us and we go back to average because we don't have the funding necessary to do what we're doing. And we are an example. When we get into the other thing that's, I think, fundamentally important in this decision, and Steve, I learned this from you, and I thank you for highlighting this because I think it's very important. This community is really supported economically by the school district. If you look around this community, there's a few people that can live on the lake. There's a lot of people like me that are here because we moved here because of the schools. And in the last 13, 15 years I've lived here supporting a family of 5, 98% of the money I spend in restaurants, gas stations, department stores, movies, clothing, all of that is spent in this community. And if I had not made a decision to move here, I'd be living in downtown Columbia, close to my job, and all that money would be going into those local businesses. So this school district is the main reason a lot of people come here. It keeps the home values up. It keeps customers in the businesses. And the thing that we experienced when we had a board member sue in this district.
Mr. White, we need you to wrap it up and get a few other questions here.
Okay.
Because, I want you to give some concrete recommendations.
Here's my recommendation. Here's my recommendation. But I think these are all relevant points.
Right.
Okay.
But we've got that now.
But here's the concrete recommendation. Mathematically, our numbers are going in the wrong direction. Right. And when we sit down and vote on this budget, that it's my recommendation we have to find every source of recurring revenue wherever we can, whatever that is. And to the extent we don't do that, we're giving up something in quality that is going to compound, it's going to keep getting worse. And I think it's inevitable before we solve this problem that there is going to have to be a different type of communication. It isn't the breakfast meetings once a year with 2 legislators. It isn't the occasional days at the State House. It's going to take this community.
Could you tell us what your recommendation is?
My recommendation is that we fund this budget with everything we can and every source of recurring revenue that they can come up with.
What, can you be specific? I mean, I'm saying, trying to narrow you down because I think this is what our administration needs to know. And I want to give everybody else on this board a voice so the administration knows where the, so are you saying that you think we should?
The max millage we ought to raise, and there's 2 reasons for that. If we don't raise it, it compounds in the other direction.
Right.
That's not my opinion. That's not my desire. It's a mathematical reality.
Right.
It's an absolute. And then number 2, we need to find a way to communicate with the General Assembly. We ought to enlist the help of our Chamber of Commerce. We ought to enlist the help of the business people in this community. If they don't want to be the sole source of taxes, they ought to combine their voices with ours and the parents in this community to ask the General Assembly to make this the model of what every school district should aspire to and not bring us down to some diluted average. Because I can tell you.
Okay. So that will be good. Thank you, and we'll come back to you, but we do need to give some other people a voice. So, Ms. Lovelace.
I'm going to attempt this.